Well, it's only been 2 years or so, but we're finally seeing a smaller revision of the Thermaltake Tower 900. This time around, Thermaltake are calling it the Level 20 HT, so it lines up with TT's latest naming scheme. You might be wondering just how much smaller the HT actually is. Well, it's not as small as you may think. I know many were after an M80X or MITX variant, so I guess we'll have to keep waiting for that. Weight-wise, the Level 20 HT comes in at just 4 kilograms lighter than the Tower 900. 20 kilograms by all means is not a portable chassis. 139mm has been shaved off the height to bring the HT down to a total height of 613mm, but surprisingly width and depth are larger than the Tower 900, coming in at 468mm wide and 503mm deep. We'll see later on how all this impacts hardware fitment. Colour options include the standard all black version and then the snow variant, which is the one we've been sent for review. I appreciate in the snow version that radiator brackets, drive cages and other internal parts are also white, so if you're going for a pure white theme, nearly the whole chassis is white. I will note that I did have colour variances between the different whites. I reached out to TT about this, and as my HT was an early sample, this has now been rectified in the final release model. Nearly the entire chassis is made from SPCC steel with plastic here and there, and if you've used the Tower 900 before, the Level 20 HT follows the same direction and is very sturdy. No issues with the frame twisting here. 4 4mm thick tempered glass side panels can be found at each side, the front and the top, and I'll say the tint is about medium. A new styling addition on the HT are the 2 rounded edges that run from top to bottom on each side. These can also be found along the top. These would have been added to keep the chassis in line with the whole Level 20 series, as you'll find this is one of the standout features on these cases. Interesting that Thermaltake went with silver for these parts rather than white. Removing panels are much easier this time, with 2 side panels on removable hinges and each can be locked in place via a knob, while the front has a latch at the top that simply releases it and it pops out. Top is removed via a push down latch at the back, push it down and lift the panel out. I find this handy as top access in a chassis like this is used quite a bit, as this is your main area for plugging in your motherboard I/O, other PCIe devices and your power supply. Front I/O can be found on both left and the right sides at the top of the chassis. There's enough ports here to cater for pretty much everything. On the left you'll find audio ports, hard drive LED, reset button and a power button with a built-in power LED. Right side you'll find 4 USB Type A and a USB Type C. My only issue here is having each side so far apart. This may hinder your desk position of the chassis, or if your keyboard has USB and audio pass-through, running cables would be quite messy. Moving inside the chassis and we see a very similar layout to the Tower 900, but with a few design changes. Motherboard support is from eATX all the way down to MITX. It's nice to see that eATX motherboards don't cover up any cable routing holes. But this time Thermaltake have added a dual purpose removable bracket just under the motherboard tray. A big problem in the Tower 900 was all-in-one cooler support. In the HT, a removable 360 radiator bracket comes pre-installed in the bottom of the chassis. If you wish, this bracket can be mounted on the back wall of the motherboard tray instead of at the bottom. This gives you much better flexibility for all-in-one cooler solutions, more combinations for custom loop layouts and the ability to mount a 360 sides distro plate in this spot. I had no issues with cable routing and found more than enough cutouts for my needs. If anything, maybe too many. If you run the stock configuration, you'll find a total of 6 large cable grommet holes for motherboard 24-pin SATA cables, GPU cables and more. Along the right side and the left side of the HT have the same amount of hole cutouts. Onto storage, and there's a single removable 2.5-inch drive spot at the very bottom front of the chassis. Certainly a great spot for an RGB SSD. Around the back of the chassis are 2 hard drive cages, each taking 2 3.5-inch hard drives or 2 2.5-inch SSDs for a total of 4 drives all up. Now these are all modular and can go anywhere along the right side or anywhere along the left side of the chassis. Now onto water cooling, and the Level 20 HT has some pretty decent options. A 360mm radiator bracket comes pre-installed in the back right of the chassis. This bracket can go either on the right or the left side, but unlike on the Tower 900, only one bracket is supplied instead of 2. Thermaltake has done this as whichever other side you have spare is for your PSU. I found there is so much room here, I really feel the PSU could have gone in the middle with radiators each side. But due to how this case is made, the power supply locations are either to the far left or the far right at the top. Radiator thickness for the side is very generous with 230mm of clearance before hitting the PSU or hard drive cages. Fans can also fit on the outside of the bracket. Two 140mm exhaust fan locations can be found at the very top of the chassis, which come pre-installed with two Thermaltake 140mm turbo fans. Not really something I would do, but 140mm radiators could be installed in these spots. The last radiator location is on that front 360mm removable bracket which I mentioned earlier. If in its default flat position, I found clearance here was pretty much unlimited until you hit the bottom of your video card. For me, it was roughly 150mm. If rotating this bracket 90 and mounting on the sidewall, radiator thickness is up to 145mm before hitting your pump or reservoir if using the supplied default locations. Speaking of pumps and reservoirs, just like in the Tower 900, TT have included two brackets, one on each side at the front of the chassis for that unique look we all saw in the Tower 900. I'm actually glad Thermaltake have stuck with this design, as I've seen some crazy builds with this setup. These brackets work a treat. Simply mount your pump or res on the bracket outside the chassis, then slot them in place. Max res height from the bottom of the bracket to the top of the inside of the chassis is 500mm. Now you might be thinking you'd never need that much res space, but I'm telling you now, I've seen Tower 900 builds with floor to ceiling pump res combos. I found ventilation on the HD quite good, and don't let the small gaps at the front fool you. Most of the air is brought in from the large intakes at the bottom of the chassis and exhausted out the top. As this case is raised 30mm off the ground, there is plenty of room here for bottom intake. Magnetic dust filters can be found on both bottom intake spots and on the rear spot. Also, the top two dust filters can also be unclipped and removed for cleaning. Now, it wouldn't be a GGF video if we didn't do a build, so let's check it out. Alrighty guys, now before I go over the build right here, there's just a few other things I want to cover on the Level 20 HT. There is a removable motherboard tray. I didn't mention that earlier. There's 4 screws, drop it down, out it comes. Now I do know a lot of people still like their removable motherboard trays, so it is nice that that is included. Now I did mention that all-in-one cooler support is much better on this chassis. Now the Tower 900 had really no all-in-one cooler support, but the Level 20 HT has better support, but it is still very, very tight. As you can see, the tubes are pretty much straight tight from the cooler to the motherboard where the CPU block is. Now, another area that would be good for all-in-one cooler support is probably on one of the rad brackets on the side here. The only issue with that is you wouldn't be able to bring the tubes across because it would hit the center panel on the chassis. If Thermaltake maybe had a little cutout for tubes to go in, you could install it, wrap it around, pop the tubes in, and then you could close the side panel, because that would give you a much, much shorter reach than having the all-in-one cooler down the bottom. Now you might be wondering, Does a 480mm radiator fit in the chassis? I tried it, but it does not. As you can see, it can pretty much stand up in the back, but you do have the ports just slightly creeping through one of those power supply holes. Now you could sort of mod the chassis, you could cut a little bit out at the bottom. It will fit on the supplied bracket. You just have to slot it down a little bit, so it did sort of drop down into the bottom of the chassis. Now there are two 140mm fan spots on the rear, on the back panel. I didn't cover that earlier. That'll support either two 140mm fans or two 120mm fans. Now I did try to install a radiator in that spot. You can fit a 280 or 240mm radiator, but it does foul the power supply on the inside, so it's really just for fans only. Probably if you did put a radiator, you wouldn't really be able to tube it up that well. You'd have to install the back panel and try and get your hands in through the side. Now, sort of my main concern about this case, it is just so large for the amount of usable space you have on this chassis. Now, I've got a pretty insane system here, and I've got so much room in the back here, just completely free. Now, I didn't use the 4 hard drive spots, so probably if you did put in some hard drives, it would be a little bit more full. So I've got a system like this, and I've got all this space in the back, and I can't really install any more radiators because there was only one supplied bracket. Now, I think if Thermaltake supplied a secondary radiator bracket, it would give end users more options for radiator support. Now, I did try and play around with different radiator sizes. I did manage to fit a 40mm thick radiator on the power supply side. So in this build, I still could have gone with the 360 60mm thick I've got on the right side. I've got my power supply on the left side. Then I could have got another radiator. I actually could have removed the one at the front and put it on this side here. Although half of it will be blowing into the power supply, you still got the bottom half completely sort of free. And in doing that, that means you're going to clean up sort of the looking window on each side. Because if this is in like a center of a desk, on the right side is really nice. I've got the nice white RGB fans, but on this side, looking in on this angle, I can just see everything in this system. And if you didn't have nice sleeve cables or anything like that, you're just going to see everything from this side. So with the Tower 900, originally, it had timber glass on the first half, and then on the back was like vented grills with mesh behind it. So that's how they cleaned up that. So if you are really picky about seeing your cables, you'd have to make some sort of cover for the side that doesn't have your fans. So I really think Thermaltake should throw in a secondary radiator bracket. It'll just give users extra options and more functionality to try slim radiators and things like that. One thing I haven't covered yet is price. You're looking at $189 for the black and $199 for the white. So that pretty much puts it smack bang in the center of the Phanteks Lux 2 and the Lianli 11XL. So I want to know your thoughts on that. I want to know your thoughts on the overall size of this chassis. Now, I did say it is shorter than the Tower 900, but to me, I think the height is probably really the least sort of dimension to worry about when it comes to the size of a chassis. It's really the width and the depth that's going to make up that large footprint. And this thing is massive. Just trying to carry this thing, it's literally trying to carry a mini bar fridge. But I think what Thermaltake are going for with this case, it's to sort of make it your own, and that's really what I've done with this build. I wanted to do something a little bit different, a little bit out there. So what I actually did, I installed sort of a false floor on the bottom, because at the standard height it's raised at the moment. I can't remember if I said 30 or 40 millimeters. I think I said 30 millimeters off the ground. I could not fit the pass-throughs and the fittings underneath without it fouling the bottom or the desk. So you could possibly flip the pass-through fittings the other way around. So you'd have pretty much the ugly side of the thread coming up and then the clean side of the pass-through at the bottom, but I didn't really want that. I wanted the clean side to be shown. But yeah, I went with sort of an all-white theme, everything running down. Some of the tubes aren't 100% perfectly straight. I pretty much smashed this out in about 2 days. I did not have much time to do this build. I don't have a time-lapse build video for this, which I apologize for. I only had one chance to do one video. For me, yes, a time-lapse build will net me more views, but for you guys, I thought a full chassis review will benefit you guys more than me doing a time-lapse build. So I can sort of give you my thoughts, show you all the measurements and so on for this chassis. So other areas or other things I did on this chassis, as I said, I went with all white. As you can see, I painted the pump res combos, painted all the radiators. The fans come white. I can't remember what the fans are. I got them from Overclockers UK. They're some German brand. They start with a something Wing Boost 3 fans. They look pretty cool. The RGB on them is real nice and vibrant, but I stuck with the white theme. Of course, the motherboard is the Aorus Z390 Extreme Water Force. You might be wondering why that's white. I painted that earlier in the year white for a Computex build, and I still had it hanging around, so I thought I'll throw it in this build here, which I think is sort of blended in really nice. I guess the only thing that isn't white is the power supply. I probably could have grabbed a white one, but I didn't really show it in the shot, so I just focused on the front there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I did want to keep the traditional sort of level 20 HT and that Tower 900 look with the two sort of tower reservoirs each side, because that's pretty much, I think, the look that everyone fell in love with on the Tower 900. And then once I got that false floor, I just sort of mounted everything on it and went from there. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on the build. Let me know your thoughts on the chassis, definitely the size of it. If you think Thermaltake should add a secondary radiator bracket, maybe even a secondary power supply bracket, because you only get one PSU bracket, and without that PSU bracket up top, you can only install one power supply either on the left side or the right side. I'm not sure how many people want two power supplies, but hey, if they did have the secondary bracket, that could give you an option to run redundant power supplies or something like that. But yeah, I think that's it for this review. I want to thank Thermaltake for sending this out. I want to thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.